You're watching Open Agenda. Here's our host, Joe White.
Welcome to Open Agenda. I'm your host, Joe White. In this episode, we're going to take a look back and really make sure everyone understands really what is Question A, why have we spent so much time talking about it. In studio with me is Joe Venosa, our Executive Director. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm well, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. So I think people at home are probably wondering why we've switched sides, right?
What's going on here?
The main point is this is not about what's left or right, right?
No, it's about what's right or wrong.
I think one of the hardest things to hear from the other side that has used so many different tactics to get people to be scared, to get to remove the executive form of government, is that they're making this some sort of national political issue. And I'm hoping you and I can spend some time today taking a look back, talking about how this is not a partisan tactic at all from either side. This is just good for local politics, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So Joe, I want to ask you. So Joe, you're a professor at Salisbury University, history, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I want you to take some time to really talk about what is Question A, the charter amendment that we're going to vote for or against in November. What is it?
Well, essentially, it's a decision. It's a decision about, do we continue with the system that we have, right, where we have a county executive that has an inordinate amount of power and concentrated authority, or do we go to a system that we have had before in this county's history for much of it, 140 years, as well as a system that most of the country uses, which is a councilmatic form of government, in which power is not concentrated in one person's hands, but 7, and a council then has to use a consensus for the day-to-day running of county government.
But Joe, I've heard people from the other side state that if you take away the executive, that you're taking away their voice on deciding who's running the county. Why is that? Explain that. Why is it not true?
Well, it's not true for a lot of reasons, but you know, that argument is sometimes tied into this other talking point. You'll hear people say, obviously, you're taking away the people's voice, and they'll also say you're taking away checks and balances. The problem with that whole argument is this. We don't really actually have a check and balance system right now. We fundamentally have 2 separate governments operating at the same time, because essentially the executive runs aspects of government in a way that has no transparency, no public oversight, no ability to regulate or contain abuse, no ability for broader members of the Wicomico government or of the public to have any sense of what's going on.
But in the executive form of government, do we not have a county administrator?
You have an executive who also has a county administrator, a deputy administrator, and various staff that are all doing different things, which, ironically, if you look at it in terms of a councilmatic form of government, you would have a much more efficient group of people doing those things rather than a bloated bureaucracy where one person can kind of determine a selected team to do different things based on what they want.
But don't you, in a councilmatic form of government, you have a county administrator there as well?
You do, but you have an administrator that has to have some professional qualifications and is vetted by a group of people that we elect.
Okay.
So in a sense, what you're getting is the ability to have a professional manager, okay, who can be hired or fired with a majority vote in public with oversight.
Are you saying that in either form of government, you have a county administrator, but with an executive form, you have one person who chooses that person, but in a councilmatic form of government, you actually have 7 people that have to come to consensus to hire this person?
Indeed, and that's actually the core point that I would emphasize. And this kind of goes back to your point about it not being a left-right thing. Fundamentally, when you have people that have to agree on something as a group, right, a consensus, this is true whether I teach a class and we're trying to do like a group project, or whether you're with people in the workplace, you're trying to make a decision. When people have to come together for a common purpose, it tends to help lower and mitigate the extremes.
So as much as folks who like myself, I mean, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, who might be concerned that, hey, if we move back to a councilmatic form of government, that we might have some sort of liberal wave, so to speak. It could go the other direction as well. I mean, you could have someone with an executive form who has a very liberal agenda, who now is no longer forced to operate in a transparent form, taking out the voice of every conservative in the county, correct?
Correct. And this goes back to the point that because this executive position is inherently political, it's just ripe for that kind of partisan abuse. And the reality is, and I think we all would agree on this, there's no Republican or Democrat way to pave a road or to deal with an infrastructure crisis or to sort of make sure first responders are operating, in terms of day-to-day operations. The basics of everyday government have very little to do with partisanship. The problem is the executive form of government automatically puts a singular ideological control system over those things.
What role do donors have when you have a single person versus, say, a councilmatic form of government and it's spread out over 7 folks?
Sure. Well, this is the other side of that, right? Is that for all the rhetoric on the other side of this argument about keeping the executive and the people who say we need checks and balances, right now all we have is checks, and I mean campaign checks. Because the fundamental danger with influence regarding a county executive system is this. If I'm a special interest donor and I want, for example, maybe to get a liquor license, or I want to get an access, I want access to use county property for an event, I can go to one person, I could sign a check and give a campaign donation, or I could be friends with that person, and I could have undue influence in a way that I can't with a council, because the council has to operate in public with meetings to actually go over contracts and sign various sort of agreements.
Are you saying that it's unlikely non-transparent things like an MOU written with Livewire Media, who happens to be longtime friends with our current executive, or even an MOU signed with Eastern Shore Undercover, who happened to be a campaign donor, would have some sort of would have less impact on having 7 folks? They'd have to somehow pay off or sway 4 of the 7, right?
And to put it in context, the citizens may not actually really know the extent of those agreements, because our current executive told, I believe it was Mike Bradley, a local radio host, just in an interview the other day, that she has signed 41 MOUs in the duration. Now, how many citizens out there, how many of us know that? We have no way of finding that out publicly. She happened to admit it off the cuff in an interview, but that's the reality that we're dealing with. We don't know what's going on with our tax dollars and our influence in terms of who is actually calling the shots, because so much of this is happening in the dark.
So one other question that's come up several times is, what happens to the current employees in the county if we do elect to move away from a county or executive form of government, specifically, the longtime employees? Does anything happen to them?
No, and in fact, what actually was stated at a recent forum that they had on the executive, even though I don't necessarily think that forum was particularly fully informative, but one thing that was mentioned by both the county executive on the panel and other elected officials, and by Weston Young, who is the current county manager in Worcester, was that the day-to-day operations of employees, aspects of job security are in no way impacted. You could make the argument, though, however, that because in our current system in Wicomico County, the executive could at any point arbitrarily hire or fire certain people, that employee risk and employee concerns are now, in this current system, much more in danger.
I think that was pretty evident by the county auditor's employment report that stated high turnover, high chances of bullying, and even just people who've witnessed it.
Well, the stats were 25% of current employees, and these people who were comfortable enough to answer that survey, said that they had been bullied or harassed directly, and that a third, 33%, had witnessed it. Now, if that were any other business, if that happened at a university, it would be an absolute scandal.
Exactly. Well, we're talking about the local interest groups and some of the points there. But when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how the national politics have or have no impact on this, specifically by some of the counterpoints that our current executive and her campaign have made to vote against question A.
Great.
Stick with us. When we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the counterpoints made by those who want to vote against question A and why we don't feel like they actually have very much merit in this county. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Agenda. I'm your host, Joe White. Joe Venosa is still in the studio with us. Joe, I want to take some time to really focus on some of the counterpoints that Julie Giordano's campaign, who, by the way, is funding all of the against question A election stuff that's come out, correct? I mean, that's what we've seen anyway.
Yep.
At least the parts that have authority lines.
Yes.
What role, if any, does national politics play in question A here in Wicomico County?
National politics has as much relevance to question A as the price of avocados in Mexico does.
Okay.
Meaning nothing.
Nothing.
Okay. This is not about national politics. It's not about even local political parties. This is a philosophical question, and it's a question about, at its core, the basics of is local government delivering for the citizens.
I think one of the interesting talking points is, generally speaking, conservatism is smaller government.
Yeah.
The executive form of government we have in this county right now is a larger form of the government we need, right?
Yeah, if you're looking at it as a conservative, right, as a true fiscal conservative, then you definitely want to vote for question A because of the fact that fundamentally we have seen an expansion of government size and in terms of bloated administrative salaries, new positions.
Unfunded positions.
Unfunded positions.
Why do we need a budget control form, right? Why do we need a charter for that matter?
Right,
You know,
right.
with our current executive.
Correct.
Okay, well, when does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Kamala Harris come? I mean, they're on this mailer put out, and
It was cute, though.
well, it was interesting because in
Yeah.
a different mailer,
Yeah.
we have Wes Moore.
Well,
I mean, what?
yeah,
why?
so let's explain this to the public. So one of the mailers that Ms. Giordano's campaign sent out had a picture of her and our liberal progressive governor, Wes Moore, buddy, touting, that it's not about parties, it's about working together, right? That was one mailer. And I believe that was sent out, I guess, mainly to Democratic voters or Democratic-leaning voters. And at the same time, another mailer comes out that basically says that question A is a liberal power grab. And
No, it's a liberal wave.
Liberal wave,
Yeah.
sorry, and that if it passes, woke policies and sort of all progressive things will happen. So you're telling a certain group of people one thing, and then you're telling another group, right, in the same community, the exact opposite.
Well, I think one of the things that we touched on early, and we did it with our episodes and we did it with video evidence, was, I mean, our current executive did flat fund our volunteer fire departments. That's accurate.
Well,
Public safety is not as important to her as, say, the liquor bill has been, right?
Yeah, I think here's the simple reality. Everything that at least we have stated in our material has been factually true. Factually true. Whether you want to believe it or not, it's a whole different story. There are people who don't believe the world is round.
That's true.
So, I don't know if they work in the executive office.
Is that a Republican or a Democrat thing?
I don't know. I don't know. Last I heard, the Earth was unaffiliated.
Okay.
But
and neither is this, right?
Correct. And this is the other thing, right? If you look at the facts, right, we have a Republican majority council that put this on the ballot. We have prominent Republicans that are in favor of it, and we have prominent people on the other side too.
Well, so let's talk the numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, let's state the facts. There's 7 county council members. 5 of them are Republicans.
Yep.
2 are Democrats.
Correct.
Of the 5, 4 of them voted to put the referendum to the voters. So 4 out of 5 Republicans thought this was a good idea. Now there's 2 Democrats. 1 of the 2 thought that.
Yes. So
And if we're being fair, half of the people in this room identify as a Republican and half identify as a Democrat. You're a Democrat, right?
Yep.
And none of this really matters to any part of this. We just really want transparent government, correct?
Correct. And I think that's kind of the thing that we need to get back to is that, I think when you get down to the local issues, it's not just that national politics matters less at the local level, but I think I think it's in our human nature to want to live among people that we care about. And we tend not to want to think as sort of like different tribes when you're at that local level. If you're my neighbor and your house is on fire, I'm not going to care any less because you might vote a certain way, or at least I shouldn't.
Well, I think the only tribe we're all a part of in this county is the Wicomico County resident tribe, right?
Correct. I mean, last I checked, we are all residents of Wicomico.
So if we're taking a look at this from a pragmatic standpoint and talking about results in October, and not that either one of us are endorsers of the county council, any one member, or even them as a group itself, just that form of government.
Yeah.
One of the things our current executive has really hung her hat on are these results like airport expansion, a new sheriff's office, a mechanic school. Let's dive in a little bit how we really got there on those three subjects.
Sure. Well, all three of those initiatives, right, took years of various planning, funding, and organization. And all three did not have fundamentally anything to do with whether or not we have a county executive. It's in regards to working with state officials, it's in regards with county planning and budgeting, and sort of broader regional economic development.
Well, I mean, the airport expansion, for instance, started 10 years ago, has taken county council to different county councils, not the current one, just different ones, to continually move those yardsticks down the field. Correct. And now here we are. But the press conference just last week, again with Governor Moore, who wasn't around when we started this, with our current county executive, and at no point did they even introduce our council president, who's been on the council the entire time this has been going on.
True, but this may surprise some people, but certain ambitious politicians tend to like to take credit for things that they're not involved with.
We'll talk about something that neither side is involved with, is the mechanic school at the airport. That money was given to us by Governor Hogan, but to the Tri-County Council, not even our current county council. It's $10 million. A third was split to Somerset, a third to Worcester, and a third to Wicomico. Wicomico County Council chose to take that money and put a mechanic school in conjunction with UMES.
Right.
Even our current county executive admitted that came about just 3 days before she came into office, and all she did was sign the check over.
So she didn't create it?
I don't think so, unless you watched the press conference last week.
I'm shocked. Let's say that we want to just actually sit down and look at some of the bigger accomplishments that have happened in this county over the last few decades, right? The things that are more notable. For example, the creation of the Henry Parker Sports Complex, the establishment of Warwick Community College, the creation of Shorebird Stadium, the Civic Center. These are things that all happened without a county executive. County executive had no role in the development of those massive things. Those were county council-based accomplishments. And so whether you're for or against those things, you can at least voice your views on them as they develop.
Yeah, and many folks have. Unfortunately, often the county executive's not been there to hear those. And I'd like to share in our last segment is a presentation that you gave to a large group in the community at the Arts Center in Salisbury. And I think that it gets a chance to maybe answer some more questions that maybe people who are just coming into knowledge that this is a ballot initiative this November would have a chance to get some of their questions asked. And I'd like to play that.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate it. So now we're going to have a presentation by a very specific professor from Salisbury University who's going to give the broader public a little bit of a background as to why we feel that question A is so important for the voters to vote for. This was a presentation given recently to a group, bipartisan group of our community members in downtown Salisbury. So I hope you watch it, and I hope you like the opening metaphor.
What are we looking at right here? The bypass, yeah, it's Route 50, right? You're going east, right? Very good. All right, I want you to imagine something. Imagine hypothetically, that you are driving on Route 50, right? But you are going the wrong way on the westbound lane, right? So you're heading east, but you happen to be in the westbound lane. Not a good situation. Trucks are coming at you, motorcycles, cars, all kinds of vehicles, right? Now, in that scenario, and I really want an answer, do you blame the individual cars and trucks and motorcycles coming at you, or do you realize that you're going down the wrong path and need to correct the situation? Who thinks you should get off that road? Okay? Who thinks you should keep going? Okay. If you can understand that, then I think you can understand the essence of question A. Because that's really what this is about. For 20 years, our county has gone through an experiment. nearly 20 years, an experiment in which we created an executive form of government that theoretically would have been a check and balance on our council. Now, our argument is that it hasn't been. In fact, it's been more or less a catastrophe in many ways. But let's put that aside for the moment. Let's look at it in a broader perspective. There are only 16% of the counties in the United States of America that have a county executive. And guess what? Most of them, believe it or not, tend to have far larger populations. Although some of the biggest counties in the country, like Los Angeles County, which has 10 million people, doesn't. So whenever you hear the argument that we're a growing county, I want you to understand that counties far larger than us don't even have this. The majority of the United States of America does not have the county executive system. Now, what are the biggest concerns, at least from our perspective? Simply put, the executive form of government has created a unilateral decision-making apparatus that is fundamentally beyond even basic regulation at this point. The budget priorities and power of one single person determine pretty much every aspect of county funding, with the exception of education, which nevertheless still has the power to set the budget. The council can only take away. So one person has the ability to determine who gets what. Total lack of transparency and use of most taxpayer funds. I want you to understand this. Regardless if it was Mr. Pollard or the current county executive, the discretion that exists to operate without oversight in the county executive system is at a level that in Wycomico County, we have less transparency over those actions than most other county executive systems. Angela Alsobrooks has more regulations on what she can do as a county executive in her county than with ours. We designed it in such a way where we basically created a vague system that is allowed to sort of fester and develop into something entirely different than what it was created as 20 years ago. There's no true accountability for charter violations other than saying that there are, and there's no mechanism to really remove an executive. And I think everybody would agree with this, and this is particularly true the last few years, the office of the executive has been used to individually target and weaponize citizens. There have been attempts by the executive's office and staff members to literally get people arrested, get them fired from their jobs, and get them ultimately publicly slandered. That is a fact. And if one person with the apparatus of the local government can literally go after an individual citizen and there's no check on that, then that ain't a check and a balance. That is a local form of authoritarianism. And I know people in this room are concerned about that concept, whatever your party background. Let's look at the effects that it's had on the actual situation of employees. 25%. In a most recent internal audit report, 25% of our county employees reported being abused or harassed. 33% reported witnessing. We now have an 8 to 23% vacancy range in most departments, one of the highest in the state. Now, education, big one for me, big one for many people here. Well, guess what? When we began this executive system 20 years ago, we funded public education at about 43%. Regardless of who's been in office, whether it was Mr. Pollard or Mr. Giordano now, it's dropped to the second lowest in the state at 26%. So we've massively defunded our actual funding for education. And again, part of it is because one person can set the priority. When this was being debated 20 years ago, and thank you to Harry for this, because I had the chance to read Mr. Victor Chavala's report that he filed 20 years ago. In that 30-page report, stated, quote, the weakness of this form of government, the proposed executive system, is the reliance placed on a single person to lead and manage effectively. Usually the qualifications for an elected executive are not spelled out in the county charter. Another risk is the traditional concern about the county executive form of government, placing extensive operational and political power in the hands of a single individual. So this was something more that we worried about 20 years ago. In fact, Tony Sarbanes put it very well in the Salisbury Independent 20 years ago. He said, the county executive system vests too much power in one person and adds another layer of bureaucracy. It will ultimately cost the county more money, and this does not seem feasible under the constraints of the imposed, the fiscal constraints imposed 4 years ago by the revenue package.
Thank you.
Former Councilman Ernie Davis recently, in an interview with Gaines Hawkins, actually said it best too. Thank you for this. Quote, the county executive has free reign to do whatever he or she wants, said Davis. No controls on the position leads chaos. I couldn't agree more. Phil McCain made an interesting point. In his interview with Mr. Hawkins, he said, Pollitt's terms as a county executive mostly were because of his personality, a consensus seeker. And he says the county executive as a form of government can work with the right individual. I would argue that if you have to depend on the direction of the entire county government based on one person's personality, that's not a very stable system. Why not just revise the charter? This is something that a lot of people have said, right? Well, if you don't like the system, amend it. Well, we've amended the charter at least 13 times since 2006. 1 year in 2016, we actually amended it 7 times. None of them, unfortunately, have had any discernible impact on actually reining in the abuses because fundamentally the creation of the position was so vague and so broad and so ill-defined that any executive can effectively run not another branch of government, but as I would argue and others, a parallel government. It's really important to think of it as 2 governments right now, not as a check and a balance, because one operates with no public oversight. To put it in context, in an interview yesterday, Julie Giordano said that she signed, quote, 41 MOUs. That's memorandums of understanding. Now, no one knew about that number. How did we find out? She said it in an interview. If one person has that much discretion, it's not a good, sustainable system. Phil Tillman recently said, people considering their current referendum should ask yourselves if the county executive system has been more or less expensive, more or less efficient, have public officials who made the executive decisions been more or less accessible. His answer, more costly, less efficient, and mostly inaccessible. If question 8 fails, this is our argument, things will only get worse, and here's why. This executive now controls the apparatus of the Republican Party in such a way that anybody who does not swear Stalinist-level loyalty, no, I'm not joking, that's the truth, you know it, they will be pushed out. She already has a list of candidates, a new slate of candidates to replace existing members when they either retire or are primary. And so what are the goals? And I want you to understand, all these things we've heard directly from employees who have either been fired or quit and have told us directly. She plans to, A, privatize the roads and public works and waste division. Push through liquor store expansion, liquor stores on every corner. Her own campaign donors have said that publicly. Continued underfunding of public education, so much for being a teacher. Stacking the local commissions and oversight boards. This is often overlooked. Most of the people that have been put into the commissions are relatives or friends of campaign contributors. You don't tend to know that, and neither does the council, because the research required to find that out often takes weeks. Incredibly powerful. Gaines Hawkins said it best. He criticized the county executive back when she tried to get Dan Cox hired at an exorbitant fee for her staff. He said it's going to be a tumultuous 4 years. If question A fails, it's going to be a lot longer than 4 years. Now, the reality is this. I'm of the belief that most decent people, regardless of your political party, believe that fundamentally no local government should be weaponized against its people and should operate with basic transparency. The executive is doing it both ways. She recently sent out a mail with Wes Moore saying it's not about left or right, it's about right or wrong. She sent that to Democrat voters. Then she sent one out to Republicans with Kamala Harris, AOC, saying question A is a liberal power grab. Well, 4 out of the 5 council members that voted for it are Republican. So I don't buy that argument. But the common denominator in this, both of these ads funded by her re-election campaign. So it's not about the principle of check and balance. It's about a politician who's using it for furthering their career. And I don't care whether it's her or Rick Pollitt or Carl Anderson or anybody else. If this position with so much authority can be used so capriciously just for that, we are in big trouble. This executive, as other executives in systems that have this kind of structure, are not above going after people in their own party. And one of the things you have to understand is that the Republican Party in Wycomico County never officially took a position on question A, but because this executive, because they control the apparatus, they've turned it into a fundamentally political issue. These critiques are not just about Julie Giordano. They go back well before that. Look at all of the policies, the major ones, not just this county executive, but going back really to Bob Culver. The concentration of power into one person has allowed all these special interests to basically usurp local attitudes and concerns.
Oh, they're going to love this when it airs.